But we did get another question though. We did actually get another question. Well, not a question. I misspoke. A prediction. This was on my 2023's predictions for the Sun Belt Conference. This is from John Walker, 8273. This is from a couple of days ago when I'm recording this. Marshall wins the conference championship. Mark it down, sir. This is to win the Sun Belt. South Alabama will win the West and beat Marshall in the regular season at home. And Marshall will win the East, and then they'll go on and beat South Alabama in the championship game. That's my thoughts and predictions. So I was really intrigued by this prediction. So I'm going to take a look at their schedule. I'm going to give you guys a prediction of what I think Marshall can actually do this upcoming season. Now, before I completely dive into this particular schedule, I do want to give some context on the Marshall football team and what to expect from Marshall this upcoming season. So Marshall was actually a team that was borderline a 10-win team last year. They ended up going 9-4. So this was an above average football team, one of the sneaky good teams at the group of 5 level. They also finished a year on a 5-game winning streak as well. They took on UConn in the Myrtle Beach Bowl, and they beat UConn 28-14. That's to round out their 5-game winning streak. So this is a pretty good football team on paper. Now, I checked FanDuel before jumping into this prediction fully, but on FanDuel, as of August 7th, as of me recording this podcast, they are currently listed as an over-under at 7.5 wins for the regular season. 7.5 out of 12 games. That's what we're looking at. So there's some things that I'm looking at for Marshall. So Marshall was actually one of the best running teams in the country, and their defense was really darn good as well. Borderline top 10 teams in terms of rushing yards a game and yards allowed per game. This is a pretty good group of 5 team, at least on the defensive end and as a running team as well. The difference, though, between Marshall having a great season and maybe having just that above average season is that they do need that passing attack to improve and prove somewhat dramatically. So there were 131 teams last year that did participate at that highest level of Division I football. Out of those 131 teams, there was only 26 that were under 200 yards per game passing. And Marshall was one of those 26 teams. They ranked 110th among FBS teams out of 131. They had 192 yards per game. And factoring out the service academies, they were in the bottom 20. They're one of the 20 worst passing teams in the entire country. So they'll need more from their passing game if they are going to be one of those teams that maybe gets ranked in the top 25. I think that's really the difference between being above average and then having a good to great regular season, possibly get ranked in the top 25, maybe late in the regular season, okay? So that being said, I'm going to show you guys the 2023 Marshall football schedule. This is on FBSschedules.com. So they have their bye week is early on September 16th. Their non-conference slate, it's a pretty interesting slate. You got University of Albany, that's at the FCS level. You got Eastern Carolina, Virginia Tech, and North Carolina State. So 2 Power 5 teams on the docket. And then you have a good, not great, but a good group of 5 team in Eastern Carolina. So that could certainly make things interesting. But let's go ahead and dive into each game one by one. So we'll start with the University of Albany. They're taking on the Great Deans. That's going to be at home. Listen, it doesn't matter how good or bad an FBS team is supposed to be going into the season. 9 times out of 10, the FBS team is going to beat the FCS team. There's some FCS over FBS upsets, That certainly happened. That's not out of the question. But we're not going to sit here and predict an FCS win on any of these record predictions, right? So not going to spend too much time on Albany. I think Marshall is going to beat Albany without too much trouble. They'll get to 1-0. But then they'll leave John C. Edwards Stadium for the first time. They'll go to Greenville, North Carolina to take on Eastern Carolina. So Eastern Carolina, like I said, was a good not Power 5, excuse me, Group of 5 team last year. They went 8-5. However, Eastern Carolina, they got hammered in the transfer portal. There were some losses in the transfer portal for sure, where there's no denying that whatsoever. But that being said, they struggle with finding a pass defense as well. Now, they were hitting the transfer portal. They were already having pass defensive issues with what was on the roster, and now they got hammered by the transfer portal. That could be just as much or an even bigger issue for Eastern Carolina. However, there is still plenty of talent that is on this team as well, and I wouldn't be shocked if Eastern Carolina went to a bowl game once again, being that 7-8 win range. So here's the thing. So Eastern Carolina, they could very well be exploited by good passing teams, but we just talked about Marshall being not very good with their passing offense. They were among the bottom 20 teams in the country, excluding the service academies. That's another caveat in this. So I do think that this would be a closer game. This would be a close game that could go down to the final possession, but I'm going to give the slide in to Eastern Carolina. I think they win this one, mainly because they are at home. That's a big reason why. I just don't think Marshall can exploit Eastern Carolina's weaknesses enough. I do think that this is one of those games that could go either way, and I think there's 3 toss-up games in this schedule. So they'll be off on September 16th, and then they will play host to Virginia Tech. Now, this is their first of 2 Power 5 opponents that they will be going up against. Virginia Tech had a rough 2022 season. They were 3-8. They didn't play that 12th game because of the tragedy that happened with a couple of the Virginia football players in the past football season. Our thoughts and prayers are still with the University of Virginia in this regard. But Virginia Tech did go 3-8. It really couldn't be much worse this year. But they need playmakers on both sides of the ball. And particularly on defense, defense really needs to be better if Virginia Tech is going to go to a bowl game. So I think there's a lot of issues right now at Virginia Tech. Right now, it's a rebuild for Brent Pry. He's the head coach at Virginia Tech right now. I think Marshall is going to take down Virginia Tech. I think they win this game personally. And I think that Marshall could win by at least a couple of possessions in this game as well. So after that, they will jump in to the Sun Belt Conference slate. They'll start with Old Dominion, and that is their homecoming game, according to FBSschedules.com. So Old Dominion also had a rough year last year. It was not a great year for Virginia football in general. Aside from James Madison, I think James Madison was the best team in Virginia last year. That's besides the point. We'll talk about them later. There was nothing working right for Old Dominion. It was, kind of a similar situation with what Virginia Tech needs. They frankly need more difference makers on both sides of the ball. I think this is a team that's also trying to not even reload. I think they're trying to rebuild and, still get adjusted to FBS style football and that higher Division I level. I think Marshall is going to have their way with Old Dominion as well. So going into North Carolina State could be a sneaky good team. They'll be 3-1. I'm talking about Marshall, of course. North Carolina did lose Devin Weary to the transfer portal, but they did get Brennan Armstrong, who maybe not the best quarterback, but still an experienced quarterback that's played plenty of football. They're going to be at North Carolina State as well at Carter Finley Stadium. Defense is going to be nasty as well. This is going to be a nasty defense as well. This is the one game, one of possibly 2 games on schedule that I have a hard time believing that Marshall's going to win. So I'm going to say North Carolina State wins this one pretty comfortably. But then we get into the meat of Sun Belt Conference play. We got Georgia State up next. This is October 14th. They go on the road to Atlanta, Georgia. It's always tough to play on the road in college football, but Georgia State just ain't that great of a football team. They were a team that finished 4-8 last year. They should have a good running game, but unlike Marshall, defense is going to have to step up and be a lot more effective at stopping the run. And Marshall, we saw, was a very effective rushing team in 2022. That was something that we did end up seeing. So I think for Georgia State, this is a bad matchup. And even though Georgia State is at home, I think Marshall gets it done here on the road. But in terms of whether they are going to go to the Sun Belt Conference Championship and have a legitimate shot at winning it or not, it really hinges on these next two games. James Madison on October 19th. That is on a Thursday night, by the way. And then we have Coastal Carolina October 28th. That is on the road as well. So we'll start with James Madison. James Madison, they are not eligible to go bowling yet again. And they are therefore not eligible to go to the Sun Belt Conference Championship game. But that being said, that doesn't mean James Madison could influence who wins the Sun Belt Conference, because James Madison was a good team in his first year at the FBS level. They went 8-3. They were pretty stellar on defense last year. And this is a sneaky good team that had some under the radar pickups in the transfer portal. And if it wasn't for the fact that they are still ineligible because of the transition rules, I could see James Madison win the Sun Belt. I really could. That is a legitimate possibility. But that's not the case, because the NCAA has archaic rules. Like, for the transition rules, it would make sense if they were going down a level to have that transition rule in place. But if I'm going up and I'm still proving that I can compete for conference and championships and bowl eligibility, I should be able to go. I should be allowed, right? That should be the case for me. But that being said, James Madison is a really good team. This could be a really close game as well, but I actually think James Madison wins this one close. Again, I'm going to call this one yet another coin flip. Meanwhile, on the road against Coastal Carolina. Coastal Carolina is a talented team as well. They went 9-4, and they're not going to have any problems on offense at all. This is going to be a fun team to watch in Coastal Carolina. The thing with Coastal Carolina is their defense fell off a map last year, and Grayson McCall can't do everything. So if Coastal Carolina is going to be one of the premier teams in the group of five, it's really going to hinge on how effective their defense is going to be. But that being said, Coastal Carolina, they are going to be at home just outside of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I see this as a coin flip game too, and I think because of that, I think Coastal Carolina narrowly wins this game as well. But then they go play against Appalachian State. Appalachian State, they are not very effective on the defensive side of the ball. But they were a lot of fun on offense, though, particularly running the ball. But Marshall was pretty effective on defense, so I see them beating Appalachian State. Georgia Southern, meanwhile, Georgia Southern, solid team, pretty decent football team in the like group of five. If you do want to go ahead and say that, Clay Helton is actually the coach of Georgia Southern, by the way. But again, it comes down to the defense. Georgia Southern's defense is it's going to be interesting to see what happens with them moving forward. But this could be one of the best offenses in the Sun Belt. However, they're not balanced enough as a football team. So I think Marshall beats Georgia Southern here. South Alabama, I think this prediction could ring true because I do have South Alabama winning the Sun Belt. I could see this as a firm loss here, but then they'll finish the regular season against Arkansas State. Butch Jones still in a rebuild. He's actually the one coaching this Arkansas State team. The offensive line is shaky, and if you don't have that great of an offensive line, that's going to be an issue no matter who you're playing at what level. So I see Marshall winning against Arkansas State to end the regular season. So I mentioned that going into the Marshall schedule prediction that FanDuel does have them over under at 7.5 wins over the course of the regular season. I think there's several scenarios there's a couple scenarios that could play out. If there's no improvement in the passing game at all, I could see this as a team that does end up going 7-5. So they'll end up with losses to Eastern Carolina, James Madison, and Coastal Carolina, on top of NC State and South Alabama. But if that passing game does improve and there's actually a significant improvement, I think this is a team that can flirt with double-digit wins in the regular season and be ranked in the top 25 by the College Football Playoff Committee. I think that's something that seriously could happen. So the ceiling of this team, I think, for Marshall, at least in the regular season, 10-2, possibly 11-2 as well, if that ends up working in their favor. But I truly think that we're probably going to get something in the middle when it's all said and done. Averaging it out, Marshall's probably an 8-9 win team, a team that certainly is capable of winning the Sun Belt. I think South Alabama slightly better at this point, but I would not be shocked if Marshall won the Sun Belt this year. So in terms of, and if you want to go bet on FanDuel, if you want to bet on this Marshall team, I would be comfortable with going over at that 7.5. I think this is truly a team that could win 8 or 9 games. Oh, excuse me, that's sexy in most circumstances. So yeah, and I think in the coming days, I think I will put in a bet slip in on the Marshall Thundering Herd this upcoming football season. So we'll see what happens on that front, and when the dust settles, we'll see how things end up shaking out when we get to that down the road.